This video is sponsored by Only Crits. Hey, just a heads up, this is a video about death in Daggerheart, and I'm going to use a lot of examples from media to demonstrate how you can make death narratively interesting. That means there's going to be a lot of examples of death in movies and TV shows, so there's going to be some spoilers for some stuff. Here's a list on screen of all the stuff that is a major spoiler in the video. Proceed with caution. Earlier this month, I made a video about how Matt Mercer wanted to make death matter in his D&D campaign, so he introduced a ritual required to call a soul back to their body, and this ritual carried with it a chance of failure with the potential consequence of never being able to be brought back to life. But I argued that his solution didn't really solve all of his problems. Ultimately, by the end of the Chroma Conclave storyline, by around session 80 or so of the livestream, Matt still felt like his players were surviving death too often, and he was still running into the same problem he had tried to avoid. Death was starting to feel trivial.
It's do or die. Hey, I've died twice.
But when he tried to change his system, he wound up going too far beyond what his players and his audience were willing to accept. Additionally, even if they had committed to the system he suggested, where every time you die it gets intensely more likely that you will stay dead forever, that doesn't change some of the other problems people in the community have had with D&D's death mechanics for quite a long time now. Things like how the death saving throw mechanic means a dying character does basically nothing with their turns, or the way purchasing resurrection at a temple potentially trivializes life and death magic, or the frustration players feel when a character dies when their story arc is not completed. Matt's resurrection rules help to make sure that resurrection magic doesn't make death feel trivial, but death in D&D can still feel frustrating and unfun for lots of reasons. Like, whether or not you think D&D should be more lethal, or you're happy with the heroic fantasy aspect of the game, there are people in both groups who are unhappy with D&D's death system. I know that for a fact because that video I made got lots of comments from some people who don't like any resurrection magic in D&D, and some people who don't like that Matt's resurrections are not guaranteed to work because if the players spend a spell slot, they should just get the benefits of that spell. And some comments from people who have been using Matt's system with absolutely no problems, which I would argue is exactly why he didn't change it to the more extreme version he wanted to, because the system works great for lots of other groups the way he designed it. And I also got some comments from people who kind of wish he'd gone with the more extreme version because they like that death would be harder and harder to come back from every time, or they just always felt like the deaths on Critical Role felt toothless because they rarely got reversed. As all those comments prove, you're not going to make everybody happy no matter how you handle death in D&D. Although I will take this moment to thank everybody who commented, because those comments have actually been really respectful and civil. People tend to get very feisty about how they feel death should work in D&D, but I think overwhelmingly, people who may have gotten frustrated at something in the video understood that they were frustrated about Matt Mercer's approach, or the approach of the design team at Wizards of the Coast. They weren't frustrated with me more often than not. The comments have been pretty overwhelmingly civil and polite, and I'm really grateful for that. But those comments also highlighted what I was getting at in the video, which is that if you're trying to change the way death and resurrection work in D&D, not everybody is going to be happy about it. But in the last couple of years, we've been in a renaissance of tabletop games that are riffing off of some of the core concepts of D&D, but bringing their own design sensibilities to the table. And Matt Mercer got another chance to try to come up with some rules for how he feels death should work in his games. Only now he's not battling against any existing rules. He and the rest of the team at Darrington Press could build their own foundation and come up with the best death mechanics for the tone of the kinds of games they like to run. Now I still like D&D, and I still like the death mechanics of D&D. I think the death saving throw system is trying to strike a balance between representing somebody bleeding out on the battlefield while also giving the rest of the party time to try to get their friend back on their feet. And there's that tension of whether or not the players can get to their fallen comrade in time to heal them or stabilize them before the bad guys take their turn and kill an unconscious character, or the character just bleeds out by failing all their death saves. It works for what I think D&D is going for, a simulationist game. But Daggerheart is a very narrative-first game, and so a lot of the death mechanics in the system do a good job of representing the way death tends to work in stories. Obviously, that tends to work better for the kinds of campaigns run by the creators and fans of Critical Role, where the goal is to tell epic, narratively satisfying stories. I mentioned in my previous video about Matt's resurrection rules that the reason D&D players want resurrection magic in their games is not just because it's a part of other fantasy stories, it's specifically because players want to keep playing the same character and complete their story. I got some comments from some people who basically argue that that's not what the players should want from D&D. They should reframe their mindset and approach the game with the understanding that their characters could die, and the story you're playing through isn't about your character, it's about the group. That's a perfectly valid perspective, and it's absolutely one that's in keeping with the tradition of the game and the old school roots of it. But there's also a huge portion of the community that doesn't think that way anymore. But unfortunately for those players, D&D isn't really designed to keep your character around forever until you get to higher levels, at which point the game starts to alienate the players who like character death because resurrection becomes more accessible. It's one of the ways that a legacy brand like D&D struggles whenever it tries to make everybody happy. But the folks at Daggerheart don't have to serve both corners of the same community. They can design their system so that death is much more narratively satisfying, which makes the players happy because it puts them in the driver's seat. And they can also make resurrection far more rare and far less reliable, which satisfies a GM like Matt Mercer, who doesn't like it when these characters keep coming back to life over and over. Daggerheart offers the solution that Matt was looking for. So now that we've talked about how death works on Critical Role, and how Matt Mercer wished it worked differently, let's talk about how Daggerheart handles character death. Before we get to the video, just a reminder that if you like what I do here and you want to help support the channel, please consider checking out my Patreon. It's how I pay the bills, and I keep doing this as my living, which honestly means the world to me. One of my lights died, so the lighting here is a little different. I think maybe it's going to look cool, but I still need to replace some of my equipment. My tripod is about to give up the ghost as well, and I'm also really hoping to put my kid in daycare because that would really increase the amount of time I have to work on my videos during the week. So any support you can lend on Patreon is amazing, and you can also get some really cool stuff in exchange. For example, there's a poll up right now for a video topic I'm going to discuss in the future. You can help me choose a future video. Additionally, I'm planning a live stream for my patrons later this month, so if you want to participate in that live stream and ask me questions, come hang out and enjoy the Patreon. You can also get the same benefits by becoming a channel member. The polls are available there as well, and they also get to join the live stream. And you get ad-free versions of all my videos. So if any of that sounds cool to you, check out the Patreon or become a YouTube member. The links are down below. Now let's talk about how Daggerheart handles death. Facing death is an important part of being an adventurer, and having a character die can be an exciting end to a story, as well as an opportunity for the player to transition into something new. In Daggerheart, when you mark your last hit point, you must make a death move. A couple of years ago, I made a video about trying to fix death in D&D, and one of my suggestions was basically trying to figure out how you could give the character some last action that they could perform on their turn. How can you make sure their death doesn't just feel pathetic as they bleed out on the ground, but they actually get to do something valuable just before they die? But there were some mechanical problems with this approach, and I didn't have solutions to them. What if they try to do something with their last action before they die, and they roll low and fail? What if you give someone that moment of final closure, but then the players just come back and resurrect them? Once again, this was an idea for how to make death in D&D feel more dramatic and narratively satisfying, but I was having trouble making it compatible with the system itself. In that way, I relate a lot to Matt Mercer. I was trying to solve a different problem than he was, but we were both struggling to figure out how to make our idea compatible with the existing system. To make this swan song idea work, you really would need to bake it into the core system. Which, of course, is exactly what the folks at Darrington Press did, because there are 3 options for death moves you can take when your character loses their last hit point. And the first option for a death move is the Blaze of Glory. Your character embraces death and goes out in a blaze of glory. Take 1 action, at the GM's discretion, which critically succeeds, then cross through the veil of death. This is exactly what I've been trying to figure out in that video from a couple of years ago. Even one person in the comments had suggested that your final move could basically be an auto crit. That is the solution to that problem. But also, by separating this from even the chance that you're going to be making death saving throws, just by making this a thing you can choose to do when you lose your last hit point, you don't have to reconcile this with the fact that your character has been lying on the ground bleeding out for a few rounds. But now they get up and dust themselves off and perform one big heroic action. You can skip all of that. No rolling for death saves, no lying there unconscious waiting for the villain to kill you or for all your blood to wander away. You can just decide that the moment you go unconscious, you're going to give yourself the big, heroic, dramatic finale that your character deserves.
Do we take prisoners?
I don't.
This is obviously something you can't do in D&D unless you throw out the death save rule entirely. I mean, you can still try this. I made a whole video about how you could try this, but it works so much better to just strip away the death saves entirely. I touched on this in my Swansong video, but if you basically ignore death saving throws in D&D so the players can do something badass before they die, that's actually what the Samurai subclass does at much higher levels. You're taking an extremely high-level fighter ability, which are typically designed to make fighters not feel outmatched by everyone else in the party, so already you're taking something that is given to fighters as a consolation, and you're giving it to everybody in the party at level 1. That's obviously going to impact balance tremendously. Even if the mechanic doesn't work exactly the same way, it's close enough that it makes me hesitant about deploying something like that in my games. But Daggerheart is not carrying a lot of those same problems with it, because there are no death saves in Daggerheart. The moment you get knocked unconscious, you have to make a death move, and so you can basically decide that the attack that hit you didn't knock you unconscious, it's a fatal blow. and you have the opportunity to respond to that and take some control over your final moments. This is something that is basically impossible in D&D. You can choose to heroically sacrifice yourself, but not once you've been hit with that final attack that kills you, and especially not when you just get knocked unconscious and bleed out for 4 rounds. But Daggerheart has given players the opportunity to take some control over a moment like that and decide that this is a lethal blow, that they are going to retire their character, but they're going to go out swinging.
Climb! Climb! Okay! Goodbye!
Of course, this makes the most sense if you're ready for your character to die and you're prepared to roll up a new one, either because you're okay sacrificing yourself to save everybody else, or because the circumstances around your death are so meaningful and significant that this makes the most sense as the completion of your character arc. But a lot of players aren't necessarily going to feel that way when the bell tolls for them and they must mark that final hit point. I love playing new characters. I have no problem martyring them as I go along, but you might not be done playing your character yet, and you might want the opportunity to come back to life. Well, that brings us to Daggerheart's second death move. Avoid death. Your character avoids death and faces the consequences. They temporarily drop unconscious, and then you work with the GM to describe how the situation worsens. Your character can't move or act while unconscious, they can't be targeted by an attack, and they return to consciousness when an ally clears 1 or more of their marked hit points, or when the party finishes a long rest. After your character falls unconscious, roll your hope die. If its value is equal to or under your character's level, they gain a scar. See the following scars section. If your character gets struck down in battle, it might have just happened because you got unlucky. The enemy rolled some nasty damage, you happened to get hit with it. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is the moment where your character should be retired for good. You weren't in some epic battle with your arch rival, you didn't redeem yourself by protecting your allies. This fight just does not feel like the end of your story. This death move allows you to essentially sit out the rest of the fight, just like you would in D&D if you were rolling for death saves or somebody stabilized you. But the trade-off is that you don't have to roll those death saving throws and wonder whether or not you're going to live. You can just decide that you're not going to take any more damage during this fight. You will come back and fight again another day. So something that should have killed you just takes you off the board for the rest of the fight.
Ian.
Remind me to thank John for a lovely weekend.
Read vitals.
Heartbeat detected.
You okay? Yeah, I'm good. I've been stabbed before. Oh, God.
Again, this is basically a way to prevent unsatisfying and undramatic character deaths, and make sure that going unconscious feels more like it would in a movie or TV show. I can truly think of very few examples of a character getting knocked out in a movie where the character would slowly die from that wound. More often, they might need to be revived by a fellow party member, or they might have a near-death experience, but most of the time, if somebody gets knocked down, they're just going to wake up again later on completely fine. And so if you want your game to feel more like a story, which is very much the goal of a game like Daggerheart, then being able to just decide to avoid death gives you the power to decide that this was just a moment where you got knocked out and your story will continue soon.
Sonny, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
The easy way.
Now we've been kind of bagging on D&D during this video, but the truth is, I still like that system. I said that earlier, I like the death saving throw mechanics more often than I don't. I understand why some people might not like that system, but for me, there is still an inherent drama and tension that happens anytime somebody starts rolling death saving throws. You could maybe make the case that that tension starts to fade when somebody starts succeeding on multiple death saving throws, and of course the other problem is that it does essentially mean the player is doing nothing for at least 2 or 3 rounds, and potentially for as many as 5 rounds. They could be doing nothing but rolling a single die on their turn. And then if they succeed and stabilize themselves, they will do nothing for the rest of the battle unless they happen to roll a natural 20 and get back a hit point, or somebody else in the party is able to heal them. But is there a way we can capture the tension of those death saving throws without making it necessary for the player to do nothing for several turns? If you were trying to make a game that was less simulationist and more narrative focused, you might want to just drop that down to one single roll, sort of a winner-takes-all system. And that's what Daggerheart does with its third and final death move. Risk it all. Roll your duality dice. If the hope die is higher, your character stays on their feet and clears an amount of hit points or stress equal to the value of the hope die. Divide the hope die value between the hit points and stress however you'd prefer. If the fear die is higher, your character crosses through the veil of death. If you critically succeed, your character stays up and clears all hit points and stress. This eliminates the aspect of death saving throws that I do think are kind of the weakest aspects of that system. It reduces the length of time that your player is doing nothing. Remember, this doesn't even happen when they come back to the player's next turn like in D&D. It literally happens the moment they go unconscious. But also, like I mentioned a moment ago, one of the other problems with the death saving throw mechanic is that once you've succeeded on 3 death saves, you're still out of the fight. You're not conscious, you're just not dying. It's a lot of tension and buildup leading to the least dramatic result. Daggerheart just split these two results. If you're okay just sitting out the rest of the fight, you don't need to roll anything. Just use the death move we talked about a second ago, the avoid death move. Let yourself get knocked unconscious and you don't have to worry about rolling. And if you do want to roll, then the reward you get for rolling well isn't just that you sit out the fight, you're actually just back in the fight. So either you get lucky and something that should have killed you doesn't, and you rally, or you get unlucky and you get brought down in battle and die unceremoniously.
Jesus! Come on. Lucky bastard.
Check out, you want to see something cool?
Oh, cool. It stopped the bullet, Harry.
I'm a leaf on the wind. Watch out.
And the reward for rolling well is actually pretty good. You're not just back on your feet, you clear some hit points and some stress, maybe all of them if you critically succeed. And that's really nice because what you don't want is a situation where you get back on your feet but you have a single hit point and you get immediately knocked back unconscious. That works fine for D&D because you didn't choose to take a specific death move. You got the best result of a random system, the same random system everybody interacts with when they get knocked unconscious. But if Daggerheart gave you a choice between death moves but getting back up still means you're really, really badly hurt to the point where you're probably going to get knocked out the next time an enemy attacks you, then at that point it's almost not even worth rolling. You would never risk it all because if you're okay with the possibility that your character might die, you're better off just going out in a blaze of glory. Might as well go out on your own terms. But because Daggerheart gives you the chance of this huge reward when you take this death move and roll with hope, it suddenly makes this option a lot more appealing. Because you could come back with 2 hit points, which is already better than you get in D&D, especially because the damage in Daggerheart is so different than it is in D&D. But also you could come back with as many as 11 or 12. And remember, if you roll critical, you come back with everything. It makes you feel like an unstoppable badass when you come back from the brink of death at full power, or a lot more power than you had, possibly more than you had when you started the fight. You'd be in much better shape when the fight began. And that's incredibly dramatic.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Hello! My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Stop saying that! Hello! My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die!
Additionally, while I think D&D's death save system can lead to some really good tension at the table, that tension is really only there because of the initiative system. The dramatic question isn't whether your character is going to bleed to death, it's really whether they're going to bleed to death before somebody comes and stabilizes them on their turn, and whether your friends are going to be able to do that before a bad guy comes along and finishes you off on the bad guy's turn. I've had some really memorable combats where characters were unconscious, and even though I still think it's a weakness of the system that the unconscious player doesn't get to do much on their turns besides roll a die, I still don't hate the system overall. But if you were to get rid of the initiative system, you lose all the tension of an unconscious character rolling saves on their turn, because you can just decide the other players take their turns now to run up and heal you before the bad guys get a chance to kill you, or your turn comes along and you get a chance to bleed out. Yes, Daggerheart has an initiative system, but the game is really designed to be used without initiative. So all the tension we get from the simulationist system doesn't really apply if we keep the same death system. So we might as well throw it all out and go with the most dramatic result possible. This approach still appeals to the players who enjoy leaving their life in the hands of the dice. They like the randomness, they like leaving things up to chance. But now we've eliminated some of the tedium of the death saving throw rolls, where nothing really happens. We've condensed all the drama of death saves down to just one roll. It really is the ultimate risk-reward.
We'll let the fate decide, huh? What's the most you ever lost on a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost on a coin toss.
You live. You die.
Now we're talking.
Actually, those are all examples where somebody has a 50-50 chance of dying, but that's not true for this death move. On Critical Role's Age of Umbra miniseries, there was an episode where the characters kept getting knocked unconscious over and over again, so they spent a lot of time thinking about death moves and talking about them, which ones the players were leaning towards, what felt like the right time to take some moves over others, and Matt said that if they take the risk-it-all move, they have a 50% chance of dying. But that's technically not true, because if you roll doubles, that's considered a critical, which is a success, and you live, and you get all your hit points and stress back. And you have an 8% chance of getting a critical when you roll your duality dice in Daggerheart. So really, you have a 42% chance of dying if you risk it all. And that's also very close mathematically to the chances of rolling a failed death saving throw in D&D. Rolling a 9 or lower on a d20 is about a 45% chance. So your chances of surviving in Daggerheart when you risk it all are about the same as your chances of rolling a successful death saving throw in Dungeons & Dragons. So, you know, take your own dice luck into consideration when you decide which death move you want to take.
Where is the girl?
What?
did you just do?
I put in one bullet, didn't I?
You put a live round in that gun.
Oh, yeah, there was like an 8% chance. Wasn't it just 8?
8?
Yeah.
Who taught you math?
And speaking of dice, this video is sponsored by OnlyCrits, and so I'm going to hand things off to our OnlyCrits spokesman. Hello there, Winnie the Pooh here, and I wanted to tell you about all the marvelous dice you can get from OnlyCrits. They've got an incredible diverse selection of dice of any kind you might want. They've got metal dice, sharp edge dice, hollow dice, and dice with cute little animals in them. And the great thing about OnlyCrits dice is that when you pick up a set, you don't just want one set of dice, you're going to want another one too, which is perfect because in Daggerheart you're going to need 2 different D12s, so you might as well pick up 2 full sets of dice from OnlyCrits. You can get 2 incredible metal dice sets, and hear the satisfying clunks as those dice hit the table. Or roll 2 gemstone dice and feel like you're rolling a piece of marble and a piece of amethyst. Or you can roll 2 D12s with a tiny little ducky and a chicken inside them, so it's like you're rolling with the chicken and duck from Friends, which, as we've already established, is my favorite show. And if you want to get a discount off your order, then make sure to visit onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout to save 12% off of your order. Once again, that's onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to OnlyCrits for sponsoring this video. Cheerio! Of course, if you risked it all and failed, or went out in a blaze of glory, and your character died, you're going to need to roll up a new character. If a player makes a death move that results in their character dying, they should work with the GM before the next session to build a new character at the current level of the rest of the party. Now, that's typically where we all kind of stop when we're making replacement characters in D&D. There's a lot less emphasis on how they're going to fit into the group. Or rather, I think a lot of players and game masters do think about that. We do think about how we can fit a new character into an existing group and give them some connections to the plot that the players are dealing with right now. But the game doesn't typically give us a lot of guidance on how to do it.
This is Winston Zedmore. He's here about the job.
Beautiful, you're hired. Ray Stantz, Pete Venkman.
But in Daggerheart, there's a lot more emphasis on building your group together. You really are meant to create your party together at session 0 and figure out how they all know each other or have some sort of dynamic together already. The last thing you want is just some randos showing up and nobody knows who they are or cares about them.
Thanks for nothing.
And who the hell are you?
Thankfully, Daggerheart gives you a full list of suggestions for how you can integrate a new character into an existing group. If a PC dies or retires from adventuring, you should collaborate with the player between sessions to develop a new character for them to play at the current level of the party. If your player and group want to, they can answer the usual connection questions, giving them existing relationships to everyone in the party. You can also advance the party's story by taking a more dramatic route. Skip the normal connection questions and instead ask one or more of the following questions. You have vital information the party needs to continue on their journey. What is it? And how did you obtain it?
Until I get back my $5,000, you're gonna get more than you bargained for! I'm your goddamn partner!
You are in desperate need of help that only the party can provide. What danger follows you? And what do you have for the party in exchange?
Somebody is after me. You're always around when all this weird stuff is happening. And I know you're very strong. And you've got all those weapons. I was kind of hoping you were in a gang.
You know somebody in the party very well and have searched them out. What happened the last time you saw this person, and why are you seeking them out now?
Okay, you're here. Bad guys are here. Evie's been kidnapped. Let me guess.
Yes. They once again removed the creature from his grave.
You lost your last adventuring party to something or someone terrible. What caused their downfall? And how is this new party connected to those previous adventurers?
Angel. Azazel. Emma. Banshee.
Mutant brothers and sisters, all dead.
Where were you when your own people needed you?
You are part of a faction that opposed the party, but now you want to align with them. What happened that made you seek them out? And how are you going to prove to the party that you can be trusted?
Hello, Zuko here.
You have been charged with delivering a lost item to a member of the party. What is it, and what personal quest is it tied to that requires working with the party?
Do you think my son would be that stupid that he would bring my diary all the way back here? You didn't, did you? You didn't bring it, did you?
Well,
You did.
look, can we discuss this later?
I should have mailed it to the Marx brothers. Will you take it easy?
Okay, obviously that example didn't go the way that he hoped. Maybe there's a better example of bringing someone a significant item that they're actually excited to see. No, we're not touching that one. For some reason, people still feel very strongly about that scene. It's been 8 years, and that is still a really raw wound for a lot of people. Can we come up with another example of somebody giving someone a lost item in a way that demonstrates their trustworthiness and immediately gets them recruited onto the team?
There may be no way to make you trust me, but we need to go.
You know what, that's close enough. Although, speaking of people having a raw wound, that's actually the perfect segue to talk about the next feature of Daggerheart's death system. scars. If you choose to avoid death, you might take a scar. If you do, cross out one of your hope slots. You can't use this slot anymore. The narrative impact of this scar is up to you. For example, you might now bear a physical scar, a painful memory, or a deep fear.
Six-fingered man lived me alive. But he gave me this.
It's been 4 years to the day since where the top sat. It's never really healed.
Not the man I knew 10 years ago.
It's not the years. It's the mileage.
Tony.
How did you get out of the wormhole?
Wait a minute. Tony. What you say? Tony.
I'm very glad that the book makes it clear that the scar doesn't have to be physical. I like giving characters physical scars as a way to reflect the damage that almost killed them. I already do that in my D&D games all the time, but I know other players may not all love that idea or may feel differently about it, or it's a more complicated topic for them personally, so I don't think it needs to be a hard and fast rule that their character has to get a personal scar if that's not necessarily how they want to roleplay their character. And it's also absolutely in keeping with a game designed by the folks at Critical Role to design a system that basically gives you psychological scars and painful memories that you can choose to deal with at your own discretion. If you want, your character can just get a physical scar. That's probably very easy to justify anytime your character gets knocked unconscious. Like I said, I already do that a lot. But you can also establish that now they have a phobia or a painful memory. And the game also gives you the freedom to get rid of your scars if that's what you choose to do. Scars are permanent, but can be healed at the GM's discretion as a downtime project, a reward for a quest focused on healing that scar, or something with similar narrative weight.
It's a scar. It can't be healed.
This is water from the Spirit Oasis at the North Pole. It has special properties, so I've been saving it for something important. I don't know if it would work, but...
River.
I'm all right.
All right. You're free. You're free.
But getting rid of scars isn't easy, and unless you really devote a lot of time to getting rid of one, it's assumed that they're permanent, which means there's a consequence to getting knocked unconscious and always taking the least risky option, choosing to go unconscious instead of going out in a blaze of glory or risking it all with a dice roll. It's great that the players have the option to not lose their character if they're not done playing them, but there's also got to still be some consequence to getting knocked down in battle. Otherwise, we're dealing with exactly the same problem Matt was trying to fix in his Critical Role campaigns. Death starts to feel like it doesn't matter. Sure, your character's not literally dying when they drop to 0 hit points in most games, but in this game, that can be what it means unless you specifically choose that it doesn't. And if that's the case, if that's what you choose, then the point remains. There has to be some cost to getting knocked down, otherwise the violence of the game starts to feel cheap. Scars are the game's solution to that. And because you lose a hope slot every time you take a scar, there's a finite number of times you can take that approach to death. Eventually, you're going to run out of hope. If you ever cross out your last hope slot, it's time to end your character's journey. Work with the GM to find a fitting way for the party to say goodbye to them at the end of the session, and then prepare a new character at the current level of the rest of the party for the next time you play. If they get enough scars, the character retires. You can decide whether they took physical or emotional scars, but eventually there's going to come a point where they just can't keep up with the hero's life anymore, and it's time for them to ride off into the sunset.
Well, after I put the stones back, I thought, maybe I'll try some of that life Tony was telling me to get.
I've just been down the gullet of an interstellar cockroach, kid. That's one of 100 memories that I don't want.
Never again.
Now, all these memories we've discussed today exist to solve a problem that often pops up in Dungeons & Dragons. Resurrection has no cost. It's undramatic, it doesn't move the story forward. However, D&D didn't introduce resurrection into the game because they were looking for a way to break the game. They introduced it for 2 reasons. Sometimes a player loses a character, but they want to find some way to keep playing them. We've already talked about most of the ways Daggerheart solves that problem. But there's one more reason D&D introduced resurrection. Because resurrection is part of a lot of old legends and myths and fantasy stories that D&D took inspiration from. The problem really arose from the fact that resurrection in fiction usually has a significant cost, whereas in Dungeons & Dragons, resurrection's cost is about 1,000 gold pieces, and that's one of the more expensive resurrection spells. Yes, technically that is a cost. Some people in the comments of my last video pointed out that I was completely overlooking the fact that resurrection spells still have a material cost. But the reason that hasn't really been part of the conversation thus far is partially because that barrier is assumed by the game to not be that big a deal. Characters who have access to Revivify are assumed to have enough money to buy the diamonds needed for that spell. But more importantly, that is very much not the sort of cost we see in myths and legends. In D&D, there's no sense of sacrifice, there's no challenge or consequence. This is what Matt was trying to create when he introduced the resurrection ritual into his games, something that was closer to the kinds of stories that inspire us. Fairy tales and epic fantasy literature, all these things where you can't just go down to the corner store and buy yourself a scroll of Raised Dead. And so, Daggerheart does contain a reference to how you can fold character resurrection into your games, if you want to bring a dead character back to life. But it's not a system or a spell you get access to at level 3 or 5 or whatever. Instead, it's a suggestion to essentially turn this into a quest. It is possible to resurrect a dead character, though it's often a long, difficult, and costly process. If the party decides to take this path upon the character's death, the GM details the steps the party must take to complete the resurrection.
Would you sail to the ends of the earth and beyond to fetch back Wicked Jack?
Where's Meg?
Bring me the eyes of the Oracle, and I will give you back your savior.
However, there is one more way you can resurrect somebody in Daggerheart. There is also the resurrection spell, available from the Splendor domain at level 10.
Lord, cast your light upon this man, your servant. Bring him back from death and darkness.
Osiris, keeper of the gate, master of all fate, hear us.
That's right, you can cast it as a spell, just like in D&D. Now doesn't that seem to contradict everything we just discussed about the design sensibilities behind why Daggerheart's death system works the way it does? Doesn't it undermine all the problems I laid out in my last video about the problems Matt was having trying to make death and resurrection more dramatic in his games? Well, yes, at first glance it kind of does. But unlike all the resurrection spells in D&D, even this spell has a chance of failure. Resurrection. Make a spell cast roll, 20. On a success, restore one creature who has been dead no longer than 100 years to full strength. Then roll a d6. On a 5 or lower, place this card into your vault permanently. On a failure, you can't cast Resurrection again for a week. So you need to roll a total of 20 to bring somebody back to life. If you fail, you can't try again for another week. That's the first obstacle. There you go, Matt finally got his DC 20 Resurrection roll just like he wanted. But now it comes when you're as high level as you can possibly be, so you don't have to worry about the feedback Matt got, where other players in other games wanted to implement his resurrection system, but because their games were so much lower level than Vox Machina, having a resurrection DC that goes up by 5 every time you die meant they would not be able to recreate the Vox Machina experience at their own tables, because the odds of bringing someone back to life more than once were getting more and more severe. That's why he didn't implement that system. But if you only make resurrection magic available as a spell you can cast at 10th level, which is max level in Daggerheart, then now that very high roll is still achievable, but the fact that you've gone your entire adventuring career without the spell means the spell feels rare and significant, like a lot of us might want. But then, let's say you succeed on that roll and you bring somebody back to life. Then you have a 5 in 6 chance of losing the spell entirely. Unless you roll a 6 on a 6-sided die, it goes into your vault permanently and you can never cast it again. That's what separates Daggerheart's resurrection system from D&D's. In D&D, you can keep casting resurrection spells as long as you want, as long as you have the slots and material components. There's no fallout for you as a spellcaster. But in Daggerheart, there's a chance you won't get to do it again at all. That is the ultimate way to make resurrection feel rare and special, to prevent resurrection from feeling like it trivializes death. This mechanic reminds me a lot of the wish spell in D&D. There's a chance that every time you cast it, it's the last time you'll be able to do so, because you are basically breaking the laws of the universe by reviving the dead.
No! You must not read from the book!
The magics you channeled are more ferocious and primal than anything you can hope to understand, and you are lucky to be alive, you rank, arrogant amateur.
The bill comes due.
But when we step back and look at the full list of options available to players when their characters face death, I think that's actually the most revealing part of this design. It's always the player's choice which option they go with when they die. During campaign 2 or 3 of Critical Role, I don't precisely remember when, but in one of their after shows, Matt was asked about his stance on player character death and resurrection, and he essentially said that it was always the player's choice whether that character would come back to life. Now, this had been the case in some form even going back to campaign 1. When Percy was killed and the party tried to bring him back to life, Matt and Taliesin made it clear after the ritual that the choice had ultimately still been up to Taliesin to decide whether Percy's soul was willing to return. And that's how the spells work in D&D, even without all of Matt's modifications. With the exception of Revivify, which just works all the time, most of their spells will fail if the soul is not willing to return. But Matt actually clarified what he meant when he said that it was ultimately up to the players. The question of whether or not their characters would come back to life was not about whether their spirit was willing to come back if a ritual was successfully performed. Instead, his point was that if the circumstances of the game went in such a way where the character could not be resurrected, like say, if the ritual failed or the party didn't have access to resurrection magic yet, but the player really did still want to keep playing that character, then Matt said he would figure out how to make that possible. It would likely be a lot more challenging. It would basically lead to probably some sort of storyline about seeking out a higher level of magic or going to the underworld and finding their soul, basically turning it into some sort of quest to return that character to life. It would be much harder than just a ritual. But he would still make it happen. And again, I don't know if he actually had that conversation with every player who lost a character during Campaign 1 and early in Campaign 2. I guess most of the time it didn't matter because Revivify, it happened so fast that it wasn't an issue, but there were some major significant deaths in Campaigns 1 and 2, and I have to wonder if he talked about it with all those players, but definitely he was very clear in the back half of Campaign 2 and going into Campaign 3, he was clear that it was his philosophy that the players, if they wanted to keep playing the characters, he would find a way to make that happen. Personally, based on the timing, I would imagine that has a lot to do with the fact that during COVID, they started pre-taping their games, which means he didn't have to worry that his inbox was going to get blown up by unhappy fans if somebody came back to life. Once he wasn't getting those updates in real time anymore in his DMs, Matt became a much more confident game master, getting back to a rhythm with his players that he was clearly a lot more comfortable with, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that another day. But in his last couple of years as the primary GM on Critical Role during campaigns 2 and 3, he was clear that if his players wanted to keep playing a character who died, even after a ritual failed, well, it was still their game. He would find some way to make it work. And sure enough, there was a character death in Campaign 3, where the circumstances around the death went in such a way that they probably would have been dead forever under most circumstances. But the player wanted to keep playing that same character, so they went on a much more significant quest to find their soul and free it and bring it back to their body. Now, I've seen some people argue that the reason characters don't die on Critical Role is because they need to make money off their merchandise, which is just not an argument I've ever understood. First of all, as we've discussed, Matt actually made permadeath more likely in his campaigns thanks to the house rule ritual he was using. His players just got lucky with the dice more often than not. Second, they have lost characters before. Characters have permanently died, and those players have gone on to make replacement characters, and the adventure has gone on without those dead characters. And they still sold merch of the dead characters. In fact, one of their first big permanent character deaths occurred maybe a couple of weeks after they finished the Kickstarter for some miniatures of their characters. So the fan base had just bought a bunch of minis of these characters, and now they were going into production when one of those characters was apparently permanently dead and stayed dead for a good long while. They wound up just making another miniature of the replacement character and offering that as an additional item you could buy. They made more money by having a replacement character. If you're someone who thinks that people don't buy merchandise of dead characters, I'm really curious if you're aware that people have been buying merchandise of Obi-Wan and Yoda and Darth Vader for quite some time now. Yes, the characters on Critical Role would frequently come back to life. They would try to bring other characters back to life. They would try to make sure characters didn't die permanently. But I don't think that had anything to do with merchandise sales. Ultimately, the reason players might want the option to come back to life, whether it's in Critical Role or in our home games, is exactly the same reason Matt frequently tried to make resurrection a lot more difficult. Death should matter in stories. From the player's perspective, when they want death to matter, it's because they want their character's death to mean something. Like, maybe it came at the end of their own character arc, or it's at the hands of a villain who had a lot of personal significance to them, or their death even just meant the rest of the party could live, because they went down swinging and took some nasty foe with them. But those players probably wouldn't be satisfied if they just got killed by some random black pudding. On the other hand, Matt wants death to matter in the sense that he doesn't like the idea that characters can just die and come back to life over and over again. And this is what I mean when I say that Daggerheart's approach to death fixes both of these problems. As a player, you get to choose whether this is the moment that you die, or even if it's on the table in this scene, or whether this is just another rough fight that you'll carry the scars from for the rest of your life. And as a game master, if the players want to literally raise a character from the dead, it's not just something they can do by visiting the magic shop or a local temple. It's going to be a whole endeavor. So now, if a player is happy with the way their character died, either because they went out in a blaze of glory, or because they risked it all and they rolled for themselves, then either way, they're probably not going to demand the other players find some way to resurrect them, because their death was on their own terms. And on the other hand, if the circumstances of their character's death would not be satisfying, then they could just get knocked out of the fight and get a scar, and that might just make their character feel like more of a badass because they have all these awesome battle scars we associate with awesome action heroes. But unlike the general network of scars we see on characters like Batman and Daredevil, these players can actually link their scars back to specific fights, but they also can't just keep doing so over and over again. Each of these non-deaths still has to matter. So just like the rising DC in Matt's resurrection system in his D&D games, and how that made it harder to bring characters back to life over and over again, there's also a ticking clock for how many times you can get knocked out during a battle in a Daggerheart campaign, which means that even the option you choose that has the least consequences because your character doesn't die, still does have some consequences, because on a long enough timeline, your character just has to hang up their guns and ride off into the sunset because they've been through so much. So yeah, Matt finally got the death system he wanted. He just basically had to get rid of unconsciousness and death saves and most resurrection spells in order to get it. And for sure, this system will not be for everybody. If you really like the randomness of death and the fact that life is cheap, you would be much better off going with a game like Shadowdark. But if you are somebody who feels similarly to Matt or as players, if you don't like the way some of the death mechanics work in D&D because they feel too random and they don't feel narratively satisfying, then Daggerheart's death system might have exactly what you're looking for. Thank you so much for watching. I've had this video cooking in the back of my head basically ever since I learned about Daggerheart's death moves, because it just seemed so clear to me that you could draw a direct line from Matt's resurrection system in D&D to the death moves in Daggerheart. Hopefully I made that clear here. Plus, I always enjoy taking a look at the way Daggerheart's mechanics remind me of other scenes in fiction, because the game's goal is to use its mechanics to replicate heroic fiction. It's to make the game feel more narrative, and I think that's a lot of fun. Clearly, I had a lot of fun making this video. If there's any other aspect of the game you want to see me discuss in more detail in the future, let me know in the comments below. This is my last Daggerheart video of the year, but I have some more videos I want to make next year. Especially, I would like coming at this from the perspective of someone who is basically a scholar of Critical Role and can speak to how this game was shaped by the player's playstyle. But even without factoring that in, there are still some major aspects of the game that I haven't talked about yet. I haven't talked about the domain system at all in my videos. But I don't really have a take on those right now, but I might still make a video about them in the future because I think it's interesting, but I really only want to make a video about it if I feel like there's something valuable I can say that would help people know whether or not this game is right for them, or how they can deploy it in their games to make their game feel more cinematic, since that's something I talk about a lot on my channel. But also, in the new year, I just want to make some more Daggerheart characters and talk about that process, because at the end of the day, I like this system, and I like talking about it. I also want to talk about Draw Steel in the new year. I haven't had a chance to dig into that game yet, but based on what I've seen so far, I have a feeling I'm really going to like it. But for the rest of this year, I've got some other awesome videos coming up, so make sure you subscribe so you can see everything I've got going on. And until next time, play fair, and have fun. Okay? Okay, we're good. This video is sponsored by Only Crits. Let's hand it over to our spokesman. Yep, I'm here. Here you go. Thank you. Okay, so this is the one you used, right? That's right. And you know what you're doing? I was about to ask you the same thing. Don't worry. This is one thing I am very good at. Good luck. You too. Here we go.